Ladies and gentlemen, just going to give it 30 seconds for people to log on. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining our session today. I hope you've had a good conference so far. I'm very, very pleased to introduce a big friend of the show, Dale Chrystie, Blockchain Strategist Global Lead at FedEx. Dale is a great strategic thinker when looking at the implementation of blockchain and the implications of blockchain. He's going to give a keynote this morning or this afternoon, depending on where in the world you are, on co-opetition in blockchain. Dale, the floor is yours.
Great. Good morning, good day, maybe good evening, wherever you are. I bring you greetings from Memphis in the central part of the United States. And I am with FedEx, business fellow, blockchain strategist for FedEx. And one of the things that we talk about is this word co-opetition. And so I wanted to explore a little bit more about that and kind of lead you into how we got to that conclusion in terms of blockchain, what it means, and why we think it's going to take all of us to make this work. But I want to start by starting in our corner office. You know, there are many companies that if you run into some person in the hallway and they're kind of bending your ear about blockchain, you kind of tend to turn the other way. You've got, you know, one person thinking of blockchain, and it's kind of in a corner office, and it's not really broadly thought of within the company. I have the great fortune of working for a company where our leaders understand blockchain. And as far back as the consensus event in New York City in 2018, early 2018, our founder and chairman, Fred Smith, calmly sat on stage with Don Tapscott and with our CIO, Rob Carter, and just said, blockchain is going to completely change worldwide supply chains. He also went deeper and said, if you're not at the edge of technology or innovation, you need to be prepared to be commoditized or potentially to become extinct. And that's a pretty bold statement for a major business leader, a global business leader, to simply come out and just say that in a matter-of-fact manner. But that's exactly where we believe this is going to go. The following year at the Blockchain Revolution Global event in Toronto, Rob Carter basically said, look, we think it's going to be open. We don't think we can put a FedEx logo on this and have the world come to us. And as a result, the quote on the slide is that, you know, our realization basically is for this to be transformative, it has to be bigger than us. And so, again, these are very different kinds of statements from that point of view, but we go to 220 countries and territories. And I have the luxury of having a default position essentially at the International Space Station. So that's the approach I'm going to take for the next few slides and the next and part of this presentation is at that level, there is no FedEx, there is no industry, and there are no borders. And so while I'm here talking on the enterprise side, and I'm on the business and strategy side in the enterprise, and I know this is a FinTech conference, Lawrence and I have talked about this, and again, I'll still share this perspective because we think it still applies beyond our global commerce space as well. So first of all, we're going to have a little fun. Actually, I flipped my order around. Let me get you to this one while we're still talking about FedEx. Fred Smith, the same gentleman that founded our company and spoke so very candidly about blockchain, in 1978, when almost nobody was thinking about data, his comment was the information about the package is as important as the package itself. And in the early 80s, we started the traceability and tracking of packages on conveyors and scanners and all the rest of those things. And so you move forward, and late last year in 2020, our current president made the reference that FedEx is at this unique intersection of the digital and physical worlds. And so what we think of from a FedEx point of view, the first 50 years is essentially on the left side of the slide. The next 50 years is essentially both, because as we all know, we can now digitize things. And that trusted blockchain digital twin essentially can give us all kinds of things. That data is no longer just a location point. It is it was in the hub, or even with IoT, it is in the hub, but it essentially glues all that data together horizontally and now can tell the story of that package, the story of what's in that package, et cetera, et cetera. So here we go. So this is going to be about maybe a 90-second history of where we've been for the last 5 years. And there's a lot of sarcasm and hopefully some humor in here, but just bear with me. So we'll just get going here. So first of all, we're all going to get rich with Bitcoin. What's blockchain? If I sprinkle a little blockchain dust on something, will it grow 6 feet tall? 3 of us have a blockchain use case, and we're going to sign non-disclosures, and we're going to create a consortium. Then we're going to treat blockchain exactly like the internet and immediately monetize it. I'm sorry, what's blockchain again? We're going to wait until someone figures out blockchain, and then we're going to jump on board. A smart contract is neither smart nor a contract. My business connects supply and demand. Peer-to-peer technology won't affect us. And finally, I don't mind co-opetition in the blockchain space as long as I don't have to work with other companies. So again, a little bit of fun there and a little bit of fun here, which is that this slide, if I were so fortunate to be in the same room with all of you, like we all want to do again, this slide tends to get a little nervous laughter in a room where people have paid good money to go to a blockchain conference, which is that blockchain is useless and boring. And this slide has aged well, I think, from that point of view. It is not yet very fast. It is not yet very scalable. It is not yet very mature. And if everybody stops listening right here and says, okay, well, the FedEx guy says it wasn't fast, scalable, or mature, why am I paying attention to it? You would miss the comma in the sentence, which is, however, what it does really, really well. And where authenticity matters, where provenance matters, we think it's going to be game changing. And that's what our founder and our CIO were referring to. So one example I'm going to give you is a smart contract example. This is Beth. Beth's a human. That sounds obvious, but it won't be as obvious moving forward, because once we start creating smart contracts that represent all kinds of things, I'm referring to those as a machine. So it's not a physical machine, but think of a smart contract essentially as a machine. And so right now, when we think of a customer essentially is a shipper or receiver for FedEx. Moving forward, that won't just be a binary shipper or receiver. That'll be a human shipper and a receiver, and it could be a machine shipper and receiver as well. Because Beth may have a number of smart contracts that work for her, essentially in a parent-child relationship, and they're going to simply do what they are told to do. So one example, which is on the screen at this point, would be, if I pick up your product and deliver it on time, and again, it's a series of if-then statements, and if I keep it within the right temperature range, and I keep it with the right humidity range, I don't expose it to shock or light, etc., whatever else we've agreed to, then you will pay me for that. Well, that doesn't sound that transformative. However, currently that gets you to a net 10, 15, 30, 60, or our collections people will give you a call and try to collect it from you. It essentially automates that whole process, and it gets you to essentially a net zero. And that now becomes very interesting to the chief financial officer or many others. Now we're on the fintech side of things, certainly. And now once we start getting into that, now we start paying more attention to some of those kinds of things. But the smart contracts we think are going to be big. Certainly they are not yet mature. But for each Beth, there may be as many as 1,000 machines out there doing these kinds of things. And from a business point of view, we're going to have to pay attention to that, because each of some of those smart contracts will also have wallets. And when you start defining who is my customer, and you start using share of wallet and various things like that, that gets you actually to a smart contract as well, and not simply your current customer whose name is Beth. A couple of other things I want to talk about. There's a lot of questions about is blockchain, what about the technology around blockchain? And I would tell you that blockchain is a technology, but it's not only a technology. One of the things that we've talked about is smart contracts. The next thing I want to talk about is peer-to-peer technology, and then I'm going to kind of pivot into the C-suite and why I think that's important. Several years ago, when I first started in the blockchain space, we were working on a specific use case. And it was a three-party use case, kind of like what's represented here on the left-hand side of this slide, with a shipper, a receiver, and a carrier. And it was an interesting use case. And much like many early proofs of concept, it's mostly throwaway work, right? You learn, you move on, you iterate, you go from there. However, kind of the big aha moment for me at that point in time, because my default position is essentially the International Space Station, is that when you think of crossing a border or crossing an ocean or crossing multiple of either, you've got this very complex, again, if I could use all my fingers, I would use all my fingers, but you've got this very complex process that sits between you and me, right? And so that includes a broker and a forwarder and a brother-in-law. I know some lady. There's all these people that are involved in that process. But I'll boil it down to a simpler example. If you need a ride and I have a car, then we may use some ride-sharing app to essentially act as a matchmaker, right? It sits between supply and demand, and it essentially says, here's this person who needs a ride, here's this person who has a car, let's bring the two together. And they carve off a piece right off the top of that, maybe 30% or something like that. And so that process works, and it is representative of many, many, many business models around the world, right? A middleman scenario sits between supply and demand and provides some kind of value, whatever the case may be. However, if you need a ride and I've got a car and we can find each other in a trusted environment like blockchain, we may no longer need that middle person. So when I was kind of joking around about we're going to wait until someone figures out blockchain and then we're going to jump on board, and my business connects supply and demand, peer-to-peer technology won't affect us. If your model is to sit between supply and demand, my strong suggestion would be that you take a look in the mirror and see what value you provide moving forward with peer-to-peer technology. It will likely change. That's the point of Fred Smith and Rob Carter's comments that I quoted, which is this is going to transform supply chain. It's going to transform many other processes from that point of view. Because if you and I can find each other and do so in a trusted environment, there are a lot of business models that may not still be relevant. And certainly, we are in a middleman role in some areas within FedEx, but many companies are essentially, fully just a middleman role from that point of view. And if that is me, I would want to know that sooner rather than later so that I can anticipate it and prepare for it. And that leads us over now to the right-hand side of the slide, which is, yes, blockchain is a technology discussion, but it's not only only a technology discussion. If the previous example involving Beth means that I can now move my average days outstanding might be 40 days or something like that if I'm the chief financial officer, all of a sudden, if you're telling me that under some percentage of my business, I could get that to a net zero and I could actually use that cash that I have available that I've already spent. I've already done that to earn that. I just don't have it in yet. You just now got my attention, right? So I think part of our challenge with blockchain in years past in the history is that we've spent so much time talking about the technology of it, but it's not the technology group that's going to bring this to full scale. It's not going to do that. We have to translate that over to the C-suite. The C-suite is responsible for their own area of expertise, chief financial, chief information or innovation, chief legal, whatever the case may be. But they are also responsible for risk and opportunity. And so I think we have to speak, as a former strategy officer, I think we have to speak their language in this case to say, why? It's not, I think early on we focused on who, FedEx, what, blockchain, when. I think we all want to know the answer to that one. And I think the thing we were missing early on is that we really aren't focusing on the word why. And I think why gets us into the C-suite. Why should the CFO care about that? Well, net zero gets them a different receivables result, gets them more cash to use, et cetera, et cetera. The chief information officer is going to need people to code those smart contracts. The chief legal officer is going to need essentially bilingual attorneys who are fluent in both paper contracts and smart contracts. And then now we're halfway around the C-suite, right? We could go around marketing, we could go around HR, we could go around the other pieces from that point of view. But the why, I think, is the interesting piece here, which is it's going to fundamentally change a lot of processes. And if you sit between supply and demand, I think as a C-suite, as a member of the C-suite, you should be looking in the mirror and you should be looking at your processes and say, okay, will this kind of peer-to-peer technology affect us? It is likely a disrupt or be disrupted scenario. And that's why I think the C-suite should be jumping in on this from a business point of view, not purely from kind of a new fringe technology point of view. Virtually everything that we know of in our world has something to do with standardization. In the US, back in the mid 1800s, they standardized railroad tracks, right? The width of them, the size of them, all the rest of those things. And by doing that, it allowed us to go coast to coast. You can get to telegraphs, you can get to the electrical grid, you can get to, again, in this case, it led me to just simply an example of the alphabet with a great big huge letter A on it. Once we can get to standardization, that gets us the network effects. Now that flywheel starts really spinning much more quickly. And people come into that, businesses come into that, it gets us to adoption, it gets us to scalability. We think that's important from that point of view. And we believe that we need standards. We are founding members of the Blockchain and Transport Alliance. I'm the chairman of the Standards Council. And we are working shoulder to shoulder with many entities. UPS is also a founding member, Salesforce, a number of others are out there. And we're simply working our way through open source royalty-free standards, as are many other standards entities. But we think that once those standards are out there, as the technology develops and matures, everyone will be able to use those standards. And we think that's important. And the final slide I'm going to have today really loops us back to the co-opetition. And so this kind of imaginary city on the right side of this slide, I want you to think of it as blockchain. It could be Dubai, it could be something, in China or some other very futuristic city that you're familiar with somewhere. It represents blockchain, right? So it's kind of this futuristic, we kind of imagine it, but we're still kind of putting our, trying to get our hands around it from that point of view. And here we are with our little flags, and now we can see it. We can stare straight across at it and see it. And as I would say, there's just one problem. The problem is we're actually separated by a canyon. There are a lot of people trying to monetize that journey across that canyon. In the US, we would refer to that as a toll road or a toll bridge, where you have to pay each time you use it. If you think of the early internet, this same effort happened around web browsers. People tried to monetize web browsers. Well, today, you don't care which web browser I use to get to your website. You just want me on your website. And you want my views and my clicks and my shopping cart and my other types of activity as it relates to you and your business. And there are still a lot of people that are trying to essentially individually cross that canyon. And while there will be examples of that, of private blockchains, of something fairly narrow in a, somewhat of a small industry. I say a small industry in terms of if you could get, 50 or 80 people in that industry to sign up to that, you'd have the entire industry. It might work. From a global commerce point of view, we don't believe that will work. We actually think in the global trade space, global commerce space, it's hundreds and hundreds of thousands of entities, all the way to a bicycle delivery company or some other individual business from that point of view. We think from that point of view, we think it's actually going to take, as I would say, a co-opetition. We think it's going to take all of us, kind of a global team, to build this bridge across this canyon. And once we get there, we will all be able to use it. We will all be able to benefit from it. Again, if you think of the, an interstate highway system or something like that, it would take more than one company to create it. But once it is built, what could you do with it? What business models could you put on top of that? And those are the kinds of things that we are going to consider. But in this case, we think it's going to take a big global village to do it. For example, we have we are part of a trade association that includes FedEx, UPS, and DHL. And in 2019, we worked together to create a position paper on blockchain and emerging technologies that we provided to World Customs and World Trade. And we actually think that in order to do that, that actually reduces friction across borders, which we win, our customers win, global trade also wins. We think it's a big, again, that International Space Station level view. We think we will all need to work together to make this happen. And with that, I will stop and stop sharing, and we'll go over to any questions that might be out there. Okay, and I just moved over into the chat session, so sorry it took me a second to get there. How are you working with your partners to drive blockchain implementation? Again, I think that's one example I just mentioned, which is the Global Express Association. As I would say, co-opetition it's not about where we compete, it's about where we can agree. And so certainly we are competitors with UPS, DHL, other examples of that from that point of view. But where we can agree is if we can reduce friction across borders, that is paper and resources and delays and waste, then we all win. And so we've actually seen that play itself out in the last 18 months from a pandemic point of view, right? Where you know, everybody dropped everything as fast as they could to try to find PPE or ventilators or other examples currently in the India part of the world, where people are trying to help people that they will never meet, right? Where can we agree? We can agree that people need assistance right now. And that's a good example of co-opetition as well. Another good example of co-opetition, and then I'll go into the next question, is a couple of years ago, maybe, the CEOs of the big three German automotive groups, Daimler, BMW, and Audi, all came out and simply said, the future of German cars is electric. Well, that sounds like one sentence, but there's a whole lot to that. First of all, that they all said it the same way. Second of all, that means that they'll come out with their own models, but they're not going to fight over the charging stations and the infrastructure and all those kinds of things. And so that's a big statement for them to simply say, it's not about where we compete. We compete at the model level, but where can we agree? We can agree that the future is electric from that point of view. And there's lots of other examples from that point of view. How do you see real world implementation of blockchain at a strategic level? Again, I think of blockchain as a C-suite discussion, and I don't think it should be limited to the innovation lab or the R&D lab or something like that. Even if we have to stop using the B word, blockchain, stop using it. It's about the capabilities. It's about the why. Why would we use, what would allow us to do? Where does it help us from a business point of view? Where are inefficiencies? Certainly not within your four walls. If it's within your four walls, there are better databases out there by far. But where you have to cross over outside of your wall or cross a border or cross those kinds of things, and early on, probably where there may be a lot of friction, it might be something worth considering. I think there's also that peer-to-peer technology thing also leads us not only to a process improvement discussion, but it also leads us to a breakthrough discussion. And so, yes, somebody, you know, if you can take a process with 5 steps and eliminate one step or improve upon one step, that's certainly valuable to most businesses. However, if you and I can find each other across a border, across wherever, and we may not need one or more middleman scenarios, that's breakthrough. That's very, very different from that point of view. And so that's one of the reasons I think the C-suite should be focused in this, because it's their job to look out on the horizon for risk and opportunity. And this certainly seems like the capabilities of blockchain are that kind of a thing. And by the way, I would say that even if blockchain isn't realized like we all think it will be at this point, I think we're beyond the point of that mattering. I think it has already changed the world. It's already changed how we think of things and what's in the realm of the possible. And I think that's a C-suite discussion. According to you, which sector would mostly be impacted with blockchain and to what extent? I was on a call yesterday where somebody asked about record keeping, and there's a ton of things from that point of view. When we start digitizing things, all kinds of things become available. I think we're seeing the financial sector moving very quickly at this point in time. And go back to the last 12 months, it's now kind of, I think, taken the lead. Whether you're talking about digital currency or central bank digital currency or DeFi or other kinds of things, certainly it's on fire right now. Probably more so than the supply chain side of things. But there are a lot of areas that are ripe for disruption from that point of view. Like I said, record keeping. I mean, vaccines, that's an interesting use case right now in terms of the provenance of vaccines, the authenticity of that. People wanting to get back into society, open society back up. And you've given me basically a piece of paper here that says I have a vaccine, and does that prove anything? Do we need to go further back upstream all the way to the manufacturer? This kind of technology could allow us to consider things like that. Okay, so you very much have a helicopter view over the industry. What are you most excited about? I'm a process improvement guy. My brain connects dots, and that's how I happened into this in the first place. I spent a lot of years in quality and process improvement and strategy and various things like that. And honestly, had I not worked for FedEx, I would not have had the luxury of that kind of International Space Station level view. And but because I do, it has been very freeing to simply look at this and say, look, there's no FedEx, there's no industry, there's no borders. Let's think big here. So again, we work with US Customs, we work with World Customs, World Trade. It can't be us, right? It can't just be FedEx. That's another question I get a lot, which is how are you going to get the government to go along? Well, I can tell you that US Customs has an almost identical view of this technology as we do, which is it's a digital future. And if we can identify that data upstream, it can have all kinds of impact, not only on reducing friction across borders, on counterfeiting and kind of fake materials. We can prove that this is a Lawrence original. It's no longer a fake or a knockoff or something like that. It has huge impact from that point of view within the supply chain piece. So again, where authenticity matters, we think this will be a huge effort. Lawrence, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up here in just a second. This is a kind of a fringe technology, but I think the conversation gets very, very interesting when we kind of pull our blinders back a little bit and say, what is the impact of the technology, whether that's peer-to-peer, whether that's smart contracts, other types of things. And then you can apply it either in the fintech side, in the supply chain side, in global commerce, medical or pharma or other examples from that point of view. As I would say, as a former strategy officer, if you're going to sit on the sidelines with blockchain, I would strongly suggest not to do that passively. If you're going to do that, jump into it, understand what it is, understand the impact of it, demystify it, get your C-suite discussing it and understanding the risk and opportunity impact of that. And then if you decide to sit on the sideline, do so strategically. And then I know when we're going to jump in, it's not yet, boom, now it is from that point of view. I think there's still a lot of people on the business side, on the C-suite side of this, that are still looking at that as this kind of mysterious fringe technology, and they don't yet understand how it is absolutely right in the middle of their world on the C-suite with risk and opportunity and other impact to their company. So with that, again, I thank you very much. I appreciate it. And I wish you all well.